Be me, Laura. This was a few months back, maybe late spring, when the nights were just starting to get warm. I remember it was a Saturday, because my whole week had been building up to this. My life revolves around understanding and articulating modern dating dynamics. I run a moderately successful blog, a space where I deconstruct the mess that is relationships in the 21st century. My core thesis is simple. Women have been taught to undervalue themselves for centuries, and the only way to correct this is to set firm, unapologetic standards. A woman's value is inherent, and it's on men to recognize and meet that value, not the other way around. My friend, who was on the same wavelength, and I had been talking about this for weeks. She was convinced my ideas were solid in theory, but wanted to see them in practice. So, we decided to conduct what I called a field experiment. The goal? To go to a place saturated with high-status men and prove that the right kind of woman, confident, aware of her worth, and not playing childish games, is exactly what they're looking for. The venue was carefully selected. Not just any club. It was one of those places with a velvet rope and a bouncer who looks like he could snap you in half. The kind of place where a cocktail costs more than a decent meal. The idea was to filter out the noise. We wanted an environment where we could find men who were successful, ambitious, and at the top of their game. Getting ready was a ritual. This wasn't about looking pretty in a conventional sense. This was about crafting a message. I chose a dress that was elegant and powerful. It was sharp, well-tailored, and expensive. It said, "I'm not here for your approval." My makeup was understated but flawless, professional. My friend went for a similar vibe. We were a team. We were on a mission. We spent the pre-game talking strategy. She reminded me of my own key points from my blog posts. No giggling. No feigning helplessness. No dumbing ourselves down. We were to be equals, projecting an aura of intellectual and financial independence. The theory was that this would act as a beacon for a truly confident man and a repellent for the insecure ones who thrive on female submissiveness. It was a perfect filter. We got in the taxi around 10 p.m. The city lights blurred past the window. I felt a surge of confidence. This was it. Tonight, I wasn't just going to write about my theories. I was going to live them. My friend was buzzing with excitement, saying how we were going to be a breath of fresh air in a sea of girls just looking for a free drink. She said men at that level must be so bored of the usual routine. They must be craving a challenge, a conversation with a woman who has her own life and opinions. It all made perfect sense. We pull up to the club. There's already a line, exactly as expected. We had reservations, so we bypassed the queue and walked straight to the entrance. As we approached the door, there were a couple of guys standing off to the side, seemingly deciding if they wanted to wait in line. One of them was Mark. I didn't know his name then, of course. He was just a face in the crowd. He was dressed fine. A nice button-down shirt, dark jeans. He looked clean-cut, normal. As I walked past, he caught my eye and offered a small, polite smile. Just a simple, friendly gesture. "Have a good night," he said, his voice quiet but clear. I gave him a brief, analytical glance. Scanned and dismissed in under a second. My internal checklist flagged him immediately. Nice guy, energy. The kind of man who is accommodating to a fault. Probably has a stable but unexciting job, drives a sensible car. He's the before picture in a self-help book for men. I didn't reply. I just gave a curt nod and kept walking. My friend saw the interaction and smirked. Once we were inside, she leaned in and whispered, "Exhibit A of what we're avoiding tonight." I agreed. I told her that his type, while harmless, is the embodiment of male mediocrity. They offer stability, but no ambition. They're comfortable. And comfort is the enemy of progress. A woman who settles for that is a woman who has given up on her own potential. The club itself was exactly what we'd pictured. Dark wood, leather banquettes, low lighting that made everyone look better. The music was a deep, thumping house beat, loud enough to feel in your chest, but not so loud that you couldn't hold a conversation if you leaned in. The air was thick with the smell of expensive perfume and a sense of exclusivity. We navigated through the crowd to the bar. We needed a strategic position, a home base from which we could observe. We ordered cocktails. I got something classic, strong. My friend got the same. We clinked our glasses. "To the experiment," she said. For the first half hour, we just watched. It was fascinating, like observing a wildlife documentary. You could see the different dynamics at play. There were the groups of young women, dressed to the nines, clearly hoping to be invited into a VIP section. There were the older men, draped in designer labels, scanning the room with a predatory boredom. There were the groups of guys who were clearly trying too hard, laughing too loudly, making a show of buying bottles. My friend and I provided a running commentary, a quiet deconstruction of the scene. We pointed out the subtle signals of insecurity. A watch that was too flashy, a man who couldn't stop checking his phone, a guy who kept touching his hair. We felt like we were above it all. We weren't participants, we were analysts. And then I saw him. He was in one of the best booths, slightly elevated from the main floor. His name, I'd later learn, was Damien. He wasn't the loudest person at his table. He wasn't the most flamboyantly dressed, but he was undeniably the center of gravity. When he spoke, everyone else listened. When he laughed, they laughed with him. He was handsome in a classic, effortless way. Good jawline. Looked like he stayed in shape. He was wearing a simple, high-quality black sweater and dark trousers. No gaudy jewelry, just a discreet, expensive-looking watch. Everything about him screamed quiet confidence. He wasn't seeking attention. It was just naturally drawn to him. My friend noticed me looking and followed my gaze. Her eyes widened slightly. "Okay," she whispered. "That's him. That's the target." I nodded slowly. He was perfect. He was the thesis statement of our experiment in human form. Now came the hard part, the execution. According to my philosophy, the worst thing a woman can do is chase. It signals neediness. It flips the dynamic. The correct strategy is to attract, to create an aura of value so compelling that he feels an innate pull to approach you. So, phase 1 was proximity and demonstration of value. We finished our drinks and casually made our way to a spot near the edge of the VIP area, closer to his booth. We weren't staring. We were just occupying the same space. I positioned myself so that I was in his general line of sight, but my body language was focused entirely on my friend. We started a conversation. We didn't talk about trivial things. I deliberately brought up a recent article about the tech market. I talked about a book I was reading on behavioral economics. I spoke clearly, articulately. I laughed at my friend's jokes, but it was a controlled, intelligent laugh. The message I was sending was clear. I am not like the other girls here. I have a brain. I have substance. I am your intellectual equal. I was a lighthouse, beaming out signals of high value into the sea of mediocrity. All he had to do was see the light and steer his ship towards it. I kept him in my peripheral vision. He was still engrossed in his own group. He glanced around the room a few times, his eyes sweeping over the crowd. At one point, his gaze passed directly over me. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. I didn't smile coyly. I didn't look away. I held his gaze with a calm, neutral expression, a look that said, "Yes, I see you, and I'm not impressed yet." He didn't react. His eyes just kept moving, scanning the rest of the room before settling back on one of his friends who was telling a story. Nothing. My friend noticed. She tried to reassure me. "It's a process," she said. "You've planted the seed. He's noticed you. He's just playing it cool." I wasn't so sure. A flicker of annoyance started to burn in my chest. Was it possible he didn't get it? That my carefully crafted signals were too subtle for him? Maybe he was used to more obvious invitations. But that was the whole point. I wasn't going to stoop to that level. We stayed in our spot for another 20 minutes. We talked. We acted unbothered. We created our little island of intellectual superiority. Meanwhile, I watched Damien's group out of the corner of my eye. A couple of girls who had been hovering nearby were eventually invited over to his table. I watched them. They were pretty, yes, but they were so typical. They giggled. They touched his arm when they laughed. They listened to his stories with wide, adoring eyes. They were playing the game I had sworn off. And it seemed to be working. This was a direct contradiction to my entire theory. My frustration was mounting. My friend could sense it. "They're just distractions," she insisted. "He's not taking them seriously. It's low-hanging fruit. He's still aware of you." But he wasn't. His back was literally turned to me now. He was completely engaged with his friends and these new girls. My lighthouse beam was hitting a brick wall. I felt a knot of indignation tighten in my stomach. How could he be so blind? Here I was, offering substance, intelligence, a genuine peer. And he was opting for that. It was an insult, not just to me, but to the very concept of a strong, independent woman. This wasn't just a personal rejection. This was a man with power and status, actively choosing vapid simplicity over complex substance. It was a symptom of a larger problem. The very toxic masculinity I wrote about, the fear of a woman who can't be easily controlled or patronized. I started rationalizing his behavior through this lens. He wasn't ignoring me. He was intimidated by me. My presence was a challenge to his comfortable worldview. It was easier for him to engage with women who posed no threat to his ego. Yes, that had to be it. This thought calmed me down a little. It put me back in a position of power, at least in my own mind. I wasn't failing. The system was. He was. But the experiment wasn't over. A failed first attempt didn't mean the theory was wrong. It just meant the methodology needed adjustment. Passive attraction wasn't working on this subject. His ego was too fragile, his defenses too high. I would have to be more direct. Not aggressive, but proactive. I needed to create an opportunity for a direct interaction, one where he couldn't simply ignore my intellectual value. I watched his group, waiting for an opening. The opportunity came when one of his friends mentioned a new art exhibit that had just opened downtown. I knew the artist. I'd read a critique of their work just last week. This was my opening. I told my friend to wait. I straightened my dress, took a deep breath, and prepared for phase 2. This was no longer a passive demonstration. This was an active intervention. I walked towards his table with a sense of purpose. This wasn't a girl trying to get a guy's attention. This was a peer initiating a high-level discussion. I found a natural opening, a small gap in the circle of people as someone shifted to order a drink. I slipped into the space, positioning myself next to one of his friends who had mentioned the art exhibit. I waited for a brief pause in the conversation. Then I made my move. I directed my comment to his friend, but my voice was projected for Damien to hear. "Excuse me for overhearing," I began, my tone casual but confident. "But were you talking about the new exhibit downtown? I read a fascinating critique of his work. The author argued his use of negative space is less about minimalism and more a commentary on the void in modern consumer culture." I delivered the line perfectly. It was intelligent, relevant, and opened the door for a real conversation. Silence. It only lasted a second, but it felt like an hour. Every head at the table turned to look at me. The intruder. Damien's eyes met mine. There was no flicker of interest, no spark of recognition, just a flat, neutral politeness. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Interesting point," he said. And then he turned back to his original conversation, picking up exactly where it had left off. He didn't just dismiss my comment, he erased it. He and his friends collectively acted as if I had never spoken. I was left standing there, a ghost in their social circle. My face burned. I have never felt so invisible in my entire life. There was nothing to do but retreat. I muttered a quiet, "Excuse me," to no one in particular, and walked back to the bar, my posture rigid. My friend rushed to my side, her face a mixture of concern and outrage on my behalf. "What happened? What did he say?" I recounted the interaction, my voice tight with humiliation. She immediately began to spin it. "Oh my God, you completely intimidated him. He had no idea how to respond to that. You came at him with intellect, and he just shut down. His ego couldn't handle it," she continued. "He's probably used to girls asking him what his sign is, not dissecting art theory. You were too much for him." I clung to her words like a life raft. She was right. Of course she was right. I wasn't the problem. He was. My approach wasn't wrong. His reception was. He was intellectually insecure. A man with true confidence would have been intrigued, not dismissive. My experiment wasn't a failure. It had just yielded an unexpected result. The supposed high-value man was, in fact, a coward. This new conclusion settled my nerves, but a bitter residue of anger remained. I decided to stay. Leaving now would be admitting defeat. We ordered another round of drinks. I told myself I was staying to observe his behavior further, to gather more data for my blog. But really, I was staying because some small masochistic part of me needed to see what would happen next. For the next hour, I watched him. I watched him laugh and joke with his friends. I watched him charm the giggling girls who hung on his every word. He never once glanced in my direction again. It was as if my entire existence had been wiped from his memory. The more I watched, the more my anger grew. It was a performance of everything I despised: the effortless male privilege, the magnetic pull of unearned confidence, the rewarding of feminine vapidity. He was the king of a shallow kingdom, and I hated him for it. My friend kept up a running commentary, reinforcing my narrative. "Look at him. He's so basic. Those girls have nothing going on upstairs. He's just looking for an easy ego boost." We were two critics in the audience, dissecting a play we found profoundly disappointing. Eventually, the night started to wind down. I saw Damien check his watch, say something to his friends. They started gathering their jackets. They were leaving. A wave of panic hit me. This couldn't be how it ended. He couldn't just walk away, completely unaware of the opportunity he'd missed, the woman he'd so carelessly dismissed. My entire theory, my entire night, my entire professional identity felt like it was on the line. He needed to be confronted, not with subtlety or intellect, but with the cold, hard facts of who I am. He needed to be made aware of his mistake. My friend saw the look on my face. "What are you thinking?" she asked, her voice low. "He's not just going to leave," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Laura, maybe we should just go." But her words lacked conviction. She was as invested in this as I was. "No," I said, my resolve hardening. "He needs to know." "You're right," she said, her tone shifting to encouragement. "You can't let him walk away thinking he's won. Show him. Show him exactly what he's turning his back on." That was all I needed. I put my drink down on the bar. I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. This was it, the final act. Damien and his group were heading for the exit. I moved to intercept them. I didn't run. I walked with a deliberate, steady pace. I positioned myself directly in his path, a few feet from the door. I crossed my arms. He almost walked right into me before he stopped, a look of mild annoyance on his face. He looked at me, and for a second I could see he didn't even recognize me. Then a faint flicker. "Oh," he said, "it's you." His friends stopped behind him, watching. "Excuse me," I said, my voice steady. "I need a moment." "I'm actually leaving," he replied, his tone dismissive. "This will only take a second," I insisted. "I'm Laura, and I have to be honest, I'm genuinely surprised you didn't approach me tonight." He raised an eyebrow. A slow, incredulous smile played on his lips. "Should I have?" he asked, his voice laced with amusement. This was my moment. The floor was mine. "Yes," I said, my confidence surging. "I'm not like the other women in this club. I'm a writer. I'm financially independent. I have a career and a point of view. I don't play games, and I value direct communication. I would have thought a man of your caliber would be tired of the usual empty-headed sycophants and would appreciate the opportunity to engage with a woman who is actually his equal." I laid it all out. My value proposition, my resume. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. His friends were staring, mouths slightly agape. Damien's smile faded. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time all night. His expression was not angry, not amused. It was cold, analytical, like a biologist examining a strange insect. He took a small step closer, lowering his voice so only our group could hear. "Let me give you some free advice," he said, his voice quiet but sharp as glass. "First, I didn't come here to be interviewed. This is a club, not a boardroom. I'm here with my friends to relax and have a good time." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Second, all that value you just listed, that's just a story you tell yourself. It's not real. Out here, in the real world, you don't look like an equal. You look desperate. You look like you came here with a checklist and a mission, and it's exhausting." My breath caught in my throat. "We're here," he said, gesturing around the room, "to have fun, to feel good. And you," he looked me dead in the eye, "are not fun. You are work. You are a walking, talking job application. And frankly, I'm not hiring." He didn't wait for a reply. He simply stepped around me, and he and his friends walked out the door, leaving me standing alone in a pocket of stunned silence. The sound of the club rushed back in to fill the void. A few people nearby who had overheard were snickering. My friend grabbed my arm, trying to pull me away, but my feet were cemented to the floor. The heat of 1,000 suns was on my face. It was the most profound, all-encompassing humiliation I had ever experienced. Every theory, every blog post, every confident assertion I had ever made turned to ash in my mouth. I finally let my friend pull me toward the exit. I just wanted to disappear. We stumbled out onto the cool night street. The air felt thin. I couldn't seem to get enough of it into my lungs. I stood there on the sidewalk, my entire world tilted on its axis. And then I saw him. Mark, the nice guy from the entrance. He was standing a little ways down the street, finishing a phone call. He put his phone in his pocket, and as he turned, his eyes met mine. He must have seen the whole thing, the confrontation, my walk of shame. I braced myself for the smirk, the look of smug satisfaction, the "I told you so" gaze, but it never came. His expression was completely neutral. There was no judgment in his eyes, no pity, no malice. He just looked at me, a silent observer who had seen the beginning and the end. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the city night. I stood there, alone on the pavement, under the flashing lights of the club that had chewed me up and spit me out. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I had absolutely nothing to say.